we don't want to end up on the front page of the news. And we also have limited resources and limited time. So rather than responding to a deluge of alerts, we want to try and prevent the majority of misconfigurations up front and then allow the CSPM to come in on the back of that saying, hey, we found some additional areas of focus for you to think about. So what Kivera does in all of this is we are agnostic to the tooling. So no matter what tooling you're using, we're able to provide those preventative controls down to that parameter level, which IAM can't really get to. So with that approach, we're kind of capturing the misconfigurations up front, and then we're allowing the CSPM to pick up any residual risks on the back of that, and also provide assurance to make sure things are working as we expect.
Have you heard of prevention is better than cure? But did you know that prevention is better than cure in the cloud world as well, from a security perspective? So in this episode, we are talking about how prevention could also happen within the cloud, maybe sometimes with cloud native, but sometimes it requires a non-native solution. In this episode, we'll talk about the importance of prevention use in AWS context, as well as the wider cloud context, how it's a bad idea to just rely on detection as the only way you do security, because when you can prevent and have a paved road, why not use that to guide everyone who's using the cloud the right path, instead of trying to detect and alert and throw all these things at it. In this episode, we had Neil from Kivera to talk about the importance of prevention and how, based on the experience he's had so far with AWS Cloud, he's also felt that the need for prevention is a lot more higher today than anywhere else. If you know someone who's working in the AWS space trying to do prevention controls rather than detection controls, definitely share this video with them. But if you're here for the first time, definitely check out the rest of the YouTube channel. We talk about cloud security all day, every day on Cloud Security Podcast. And if you like what you see, definitely hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy this episode with Neil from Kivera. Peace.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. Today, we're talking about CSPP. But before that, Neil, for people who don't know Neil and Kivera, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Neil Brown. I've spent almost the last 10 years working in cloud security, primarily with large enterprises. And through that experience, I kind of found a common set of challenges that customers weren't really able to solve for. And about 5 years ago, I met my co-founder, Vernon Jefferson. And so Vernon and I were working on the same customers and same client sites. And eventually we came up with this idea to solve for this particular pain point that we were identified with customers. So about 3 years ago, we co-founded Kivera.
Oh, yeah.
I'm the co-founder and VP of operations at Kivera. And we've just recently announced our seed funding round as well today. So really excited about that.
Wow.
And yeah, looking forward to kind of taking CSPP and sharing it with a broader subset of the community.
Which brings me to, what is CSPP?
Honestly, it's a really good question. So CSPP stands for Cloud Security Protection Platform. It's a set of capabilities that stems from preventative cloud security. And what it's all about at the end of the day is trying to stop resource misconfigurations in cloud before they're deployed.
Oh.
Yeah, and it encompasses different sets of capabilities around securing, cloud resources, securing cloud data. But the benefits of those end up being you're simplifying your compliance outcomes within cloud, and also being able to move a lot faster when you're kind of taking care of these things preventatively earlier on in the life cycle.
So how different would be, maybe, I guess, guardrails at the moment, people talk about them. Is that because most of them are detective?
Yeah, so there's different ways to implement guardrails. So the term guardrail is defined in many ways, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Some people will see it as a detective item, say, hey, something's gone wrong. We found a certain misconfiguration, and we're going to send you an alert about that. That can be a guardrail in itself. Or the way we see guardrails is let's actually, through the true definition, actually prevent those things up front, as in to stop people from going outside of those guardrails. Prevention is better than the cure.
And because I think it's funny because you mentioned this, a lot of people want to do prevention, but seems like it's what would be an example of a prevention thing that you can recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about something like creating a virtual machine, let's use AWS as an example. So when I want to run instances for EC2, what IAM will do, which is the native authorization language within AWS, it'll allow me to do things like you have the permission to create an instance, or you have the permission to delete an instance. What it doesn't do is tell me which subnet I'm allowed to deploy into, what security groups I can use. Is my machine encrypted? Is it facing the internet? All of these things are a level deeper than IAM, and that's kind of where the cloud provider stops. So while there are 340 services in AWS and there's about 13,000 different IAM actions, there's actually closer to 140,000 parameters that you may want to control when you're actually deploying out to cloud. So what Kivera does is it goes beyond just the service and the action where IAM stops, and we go down to that 140,000 individual parameters that can be controlled preventatively through Kivera.
So what would be, I guess, in a cloud context, is there a service from the cloud provider at the moment that does this?
So not quite. So your cloud native services across all three cloud providers usually stop at that IAM action level. So within AWS, your SCPs, your resource boundaries, your IAM policies, they're all going to stop at the IAM action. So they're only going to stop at that 13,000 kind of number. It's probably closer to 14,000 by the end of this conversation, the way they grow. And the same thing happens with RBAC in Azure or Cloud IAM in Google Cloud as well. All these services are stopping at the authorization of the actual action itself. But in reality, security and developers, we want to be controlling the actual parameters themselves, because that's where really kind of rubber hits the road with compliance.
Also, are we saying that at the moment it's practically not possible for preventative to happen in the cloud because the IAM limitation?
Well, yeah, using native services, it's almost impossible. There's really no way that you can. But what customers do is they look at different approaches to solving for this. So in some circumstances, we may try and centralize every single deployment in the organization through a CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of customers do this, particularly in large enterprise. So for example, we want to use CloudFormation, and we'll say everything that's deployed out to cloud is going to use CloudFormation, and it's going to be deployed through this pipeline. What's going to happen then is the security teams are going to come in there and go, okay, and these are all the checks that we want to put in place and enforce as part of that pipeline. That really works great for maybe the first 12, 24 months of your cloud journey.
Yeah.
Once you hit a certain scale and there's a level of maturity, you're going to have developers coming going, hey, I want to use Terraform. Great, we have to go rebuild that whole pipeline again. Or maybe I want to use a new service in AWS. Can you please enable it in this pipeline?
Right.
It goes into a backlog, and then 12 or 18 months later, that service gets delivered, but the team's moved on to something else in the meantime. So there's kind of a challenge there around, if you are going down that preventative inline CI/CD kind of enforcement mode, is how do we stay current and how do we keep up with the needs of developers as they evolve over time?
Right. So, and to your point, I mean, because I think I'm trying to paint a lens for both the people who are open to the idea of building one versus buying one, I guess, because there's two camps over there. Well, people who are trying to think of building one, is there I mean, can they even build one?
Yeah, I think that's really the only approach to building, is by centralizing deployments through a CI/CD pipeline. And I guess if you had unlimited time, money, and resources, you could keep up with the demands of developers and keep up with the cloud providers. But in reality, we're always constrained in an enterprise or an organization. So we don't have unlimited budgets. I mean, how many cloud security teams have you seen that feel like they're well-funded and have, the right resources behind them? Not many, and developers will say the same thing. So keeping up with this kind of the pace of cloud, but also the pace of the tools that consume cloud, is really challenging.
Right. So to your point, I find it interesting because I think every security person has a goal that I want to prevent this from happening beforehand.
Yeah.
And the fact that the cloud security providers have a gap and they probably keep talking about IAM as a way to resolve this is probably not the right way. So to your point, centralizing in a CI/CD pipeline, would they get the ability to, when you say they would be able to prevent it, and they would have to keep up with it, if they know that, okay, so I only use 5 AWS services or 5 Azure services. Is that more of a practical approach to?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are starting out your cloud journey and it's very early days and you don't have a lot of workloads, you can absolutely go through this approach, and most customers do. So what we're really looking at with these types of approaches is, we're going back to that conversation earlier about run instances for EC2. We can enforce those controls at the pipeline level, but the challenge comes is when we want a team to deploy an EC2 instance that maybe is public because it's serving customer traffic. And so we need to go back to the pipeline, unpick that and go, we have 2 different modes, one for this team and one for that team. And in reality, most customers are using in excess of 40, 50 services within any of the cloud providers. They're multi-cloud. They want to support, with the way that the maturity of cloud is today, we've got developers who are now not coming into an organization going, hey, cloud's new to me. They're coming with a set of preconceived ideas and skills and ways in which to consume cloud. So when you tell a developer, hey, we're doing cloud at XYZ organization, and then you force them to go and deploy through this really rigid deployment mode, people turnover, we see retention issues with that. We see a lot of developer frustration going, well, I'm not building on cloud, I'm building on this abstraction layer that you've just enforced in front of me. So that's a really sort of challenging way that, we're trying to enforce these controls.
Yeah, and I think that's the platform-based model is, because it's the whole stream of platform engineers now, platform this, platform that.
Platform engineer. That whole team is dedicated to supporting these CI/CD pipelines at the end of the day.
Okay, so to your point, then people are thinking about building this and they're going, okay, I can build a CI/CD pipeline and say, okay, I cover only 5 services and I'm going to prevent people from deploying into, say, non-Sydney regions only. You can only deploy in Sydney, or you can only deploy in the East Coast or West Coast. But Is that true prevention, or is there another layer above that for prevention? Like,
Yeah.
what would be an example there?
So I think that there you're talking about prevention for a particular persona within the organization. So one particular app team is going to have a great experience saying, hey, everything that I want to do in cloud is taken care of by this one approach. But in reality, the customers that we've worked with in the past have 4,000 workloads in cloud.
Yeah.
And all those workloads are different. So at a scale, once you go beyond kind of, hey, it's my first baby steps in cloud, you're immediately hitting scale and complexity issues that kind of starts to break down this approach. And unless you're funneling a lot of resources and money into maintaining this platform, you're really kind of slowly getting behind the curve off the cloud providers. And if you think about the way, we've been to many conferences with AWS and Google and Azure, and you see that there's, 20 services announced at some of these big conferences.
Yeah.
How do we take those services and enable them in these models? And, how do we let our teams use AI and ML in a fast time to value type of way? And that's really challenging when you're constrained by a small number of people who are trying to solve this in a CI/CD pipeline.
Because I think another question people would ask at this point in time is also, hey, I already have a CSPM. I do posture management. Isn't that prevention as well, in a way?
Yeah. So look, CSPMs are really interesting, and we've implemented a number of these with different customers over the years. And the feedback that we get from the security teams is that knowing that something bad has happened, potentially minutes, hours, or in some cases days later, is not really good enough for certain risks.
Yeah.
There's certain critical and high severity risks. If something's deployed publicly, you can guarantee that that's getting scanned and port scanned and within minutes or seconds, not the minutes or hours it takes to trigger that alert.
Yeah.
And then we got to think about, well, what happens? What's the life cycle of that alert? It's going to a team for triage, then pushed onto a developer team to go and fix that. And the actual remediation might take a significant period of time before actually getting to resolving the issue at its core.
Interesting. Well, after listening to this conversation, for the few people out there thinking, I can still build this, what would you say is a good starting point for those people who probably, and by the way, all the part of them if they want to go and do it, right? And spend the money.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, many organizations do.
Yeah. So, because how you said you guys were consulting before when you kind of noticed this as a pattern across the board before you kind of said, I'm going to start a company that's clearly it's not a one-person problem, it's like a many-scale problem.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What do you recommend them as a starting point for doing this?
Yeah, to be honest, what we've seen is that while in the early days of going down this road, it's a common approach and a lot of people do it, but over time it starts to become brittle and break down as there's complexities. So obviously what we've developed to try and alleviate some of this pain is by looking at, well, what are some of the needs of developers? They want to use the latest services, they want to feel like they're moving cloud native, and they want to use the tools that best suit their workloads.
Yeah.
So they might want to use Pulumi for one particular workload, they might want to use CDK for another, they might want to use CloudFormation, maybe they just want to go straight Java SDK for certain things. Give them the flexibility, but at the same time, allow them to use all of those cloud services that are relevant to them as well. So we want to use the latest SageMaker kind of bedrock learning model that's been released. How do we kind of enable that really quickly? So that's the kind of developer experience. From the security standpoint, what do we want to do here? We want to look at it and go, hey, we don't want to end up on the front page of the news. So, and we also have limited resources and limited time. So rather than responding to a deluge of alerts, we want to try and prevent the majority of misconfigurations up front and then allow the CSPM to come in on the back of that saying, hey, we found some additional areas of focus for you to think about. So what Kivera does in all of this is we are agnostic to the tooling. So no matter what tooling you're using, we're able to provide those preventative controls down to that parameter level, which IAM can't really get to. So with that approach, we're kind of capturing the misconfigurations up front, and then we're allowing the CSPM to pick up any residual risks on the back of that, and also provide assurance to make sure things are working as we expect.
Oh, right. Oh, actually, you're right. Because IAM does not go into the, I guess, a parameter level for each service.
It does not, yeah.
You can say, I guess you can use actions and
action, and that's going back to the conversation we're having earlier, where actions are 13 or 14,000 and the parameters are 140,000.
Yeah.
And those are the things that we really care about when it comes to security.
That's right. Yeah, especially when you're dealing with 4,000 plus services as well.
Exactly. When you're at a scale of 4,000 workloads, trying to enable that is really challenging.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's most of the technical questions I had. Where can people find you on the internet to connect about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm available on LinkedIn, of course. You can email me as well. I'm more than happy to share my email publicly. So
wow, you're brave, man.
Try not to spam me too much, but it's just simple. It's just neil@kivera.io. We'll be attending a lot of the major conferences. So we'll see you guys at reInvent. We'll also be sponsoring a New York-based summit, ONUG as well. So feel free to reach out on any of the socials and we'll love to connect.
Awesome. No, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I appreciate you coming over.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, mate.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you next one.